Something unprecedented happened at Buckingham Palace this morning. As Camilla's children arrived for an official ceremony, every single royal guard refused to salute them. Not one hand moved. Not one acknowledgement was given. The silence was deafening. Palace staff stood frozen in shock as Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes walked past rows of guards who stared straight ahead as if they didn't exist. Within hours, Prince William was demanding answers. What had Camilla's children done to deserve this ultimate military insult? The truth would expose secrets that had been buried for years and threaten to tear the royal family apart forever. The morning of April 15th started with perfect spring weather. The sun was shining over Buckingham Palace. The gardens were in full bloom with tulips and daffodils, creating splashes of color across the manicured lawns. Inside the palace, preparations were underway for a special ceremony honoring military veterans who had served the crown with distinction. It was meant to be a routine event, the kind the royal family participated in dozens of times each year. Lieutenant James Morrison had been a royal guard for 8 years. He stood at his post near the east entrance of the palace, his red tunic perfectly pressed, his bearskin hat positioned exactly as regulations required. He took pride in his position, in the honor of serving the royal family. Every morning he performed his duties with precision and dedication. Saluting members of the royal family was not just protocol, it was a sign of respect for the institution he had sworn to protect. That morning, Lieutenant Morrison received an unusual message through the guard's private communication channel. It came from Sergeant Major Richard Blackwood, the most senior non-commissioned officer in the Palace Guard. The message was brief but clear. When the Queen Consort's children arrive today, standard salute protocols are suspended. Pass this to all personnel at your post. This comes from the very top. Morrison read the message 3 times, certain there must be some mistake. Suspend salute protocols? That was unheard of. Royal protocol was sacred, unchanging. You saluted members of the royal family and their immediate relatives when they passed. It was automatic, ingrained through years of training. To deliberately not salute was an insult of the highest order. He immediately called Sergeant Major Blackwood. "Sir, I need clarification on that last message. Are you saying we're not to salute Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes when they arrive?" There was a long pause on the other end. "That's correct, Lieutenant. Those are your orders. Every guard has been informed. When they arrive, you stand at attention, but you do not salute. You do not acknowledge them beyond basic courtesy if directly addressed." "But sir," Morrison protested, "that goes against every protocol we have. What's the reason for this?" "The reason is above my pay grade," Lieutenant Blackwood replied, his voice tight with tension. "I received these orders from the Lord Chamberlain's office directly. They came from Prince William himself. That's all you need to know. Follow your orders." Right. The line went dead. Morrison stood there, his mind racing. Prince William had ordered this? The future king had deliberately instructed the guards to insult Camilla's children. Something serious must have happened, something that had pushed the usually diplomatic prince to take such a drastic step. Across the palace grounds, similar conversations were taking place. Guards who had been on duty for decades were shocked by the unprecedented order. Palace staff whispered nervously in corridors. Everyone knew that when the Queen Consort's children arrived and were not saluted, it would be noticed immediately. This wasn't something that could be hidden or explained away. This was a public statement, a deliberate show of disrespect. In the palace communications office, Sarah Chen, one of the senior press officers, was having a panic attack. She had just been informed of the situation by her supervisor, and she immediately understood the implications. "This is going to be a disaster," she said, pacing back and forth in her small office. "The press will have a field day. They'll call it a family feud, a power struggle. This will dominate headlines for weeks." Her supervisor, Michael Crawford, looked equally worried. "The decision has been made at the highest level. Our job is to manage the fallout, not question the judgment. Start preparing statements. We'll need something ready by this afternoon at the latest." "Statements saying what?" Sarah demanded. "How do we explain why royal guards refuse to salute the Queen Consort's children? What possible explanation makes this look anything other than a deliberate insult? We'll call it an administrative error, a miscommunication in protocol, Michael suggested. Though even he didn't sound convinced by his own words. Nobody will believe that, Sarah said flatly. This involves every guard at the palace. You can't have a miscommunication that widespread. People aren't stupid. Meanwhile, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes were completely unaware of what awaited them. Tom, a successful food writer and critic, had been looking forward to the ceremony. His mother had asked him and his sister to attend as representatives of the family. Since she would be away on official business in Scotland, it seemed like a straightforward request, an opportunity to show support for military veterans and represent the Queen Consort at a meaningful event. Tom and Laura arrived at the palace gates in separate cars around 10:30 in the morning. They had both dressed formally for the occasion. Tom wore a dark suit with a blue tie, while Laura had chosen an elegant navy dress with pearls. They were greeted by a junior palisade who seemed nervous and uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact as she led them toward the ceremony venue as they walked through the palace grounds. Tom noticed something odd. Guards they passed stood rigidly at attention, but their hands remained at their sides. No salutes. He had attended enough royal events over the years to know that this wasn't normal. When family members passed, guards saluted. It was automatic, a sign of respect and recognition. Did you notice that? Tom whispered to his sister as they continued walking. Laura nodded, her expression troubled. Not a single salute. Something's wrong. They entered the palace through the main corridor, where a full honor guard was lined up on both sides. Normally, this would involve a ceremonial salute as they passed between the rows of guards. Instead, the guards stood motionless, staring straight ahead, their faces like stone. The silence was oppressive. Tom could feel dozens of eyes on them, but not one guard moved to acknowledge their presence. By the time they reached the ceremony room, both Tom and Laura were deeply uncomfortable. This wasn't an accident or oversight. This was deliberate. They had been publicly snubbed by the palace guard, and everyone present had witnessed it inside the ceremony room. Several high-ranking military officers were present. Along with the veterans being honored and their families, the officers looked uncomfortable, exchanging worried glances. They had all seen what had just happened in the corridor. The lack of salutes hadn't gone unnoticed by anyone. Admiral Sir Peter Hammond was presiding over the ceremony, approached Tom and Laura with an apologetic expression. Mr. Parker Bowles, Mrs. Lopes, welcome. I'm glad you could attend on behalf of the Queen Consort. His greeting was warm, but there was obvious tension in his voice. Thank you, Admiral, Tom replied, trying to maintain his composure. Though I must say, the welcome was somewhat colder than expected. Admiral Hammond's face reddened. Yes, about that. I'm afraid there's been some sort of protocol issue. I don't have all the details, but I assure you it wasn't intended as a personal slight, wasn't it? Laura asked quietly, her eyes sharp. Admiral, we just walked past 50 guards, and not one of them saluted us. That's not a protocol issue. That's a deliberate statement. Before the Admiral could respond, a palisade approached and whispered something in his ear. His expression grew even more troubled. If you'll excuse me for a moment, he said. Walking away quickly to take a phone call in the corner of the room, Tom and Laura stood awkwardly. Aware that other guests in the room were watching them with curiosity and sympathy, the ceremony was due to start in 15 minutes. But the atmosphere was already poisoned by what had happened in the corridor. Laura pulled out her phone and sent a text message to her mother. Something strange is happening at the palace. None of the guards saluted us. Do you know what's going on? The response came back almost immediately. What do you mean they didn't salute you? That's impossible. There must be some mistake. Laura showed the message to Tom, who shook his head grimly. If Mother doesn't know about this, then someone else ordered it. And there's only one person with enough authority to override standard protocol like this. William, Laura said quietly. Tom nodded. Has to be. But why? What have we done to deserve this? Across the palace, in his private office, Prince William was indeed behind the unprecedented order. He sat at his desk, his jaw set in a hard line, reviewing documents that had been brought to his attention 3 days earlier. The documents contained information that had shocked him, angered him, and ultimately led to this morning's dramatic decision. His private secretary, James Peterson, stood nearby, looking deeply concerned. "Sir, the guards followed your instructions. Parker Bowles and Lopes have arrived and they were not saluted. The message has been sent. But I must ask again if you're certain about this course of action. The backlash will be significant." "I'm certain," William said coldly. "They need to understand that actions have consequences. They need to know that they can't operate behind the scenes, manipulating situations for their own benefit, without eventually being held accountable. But sir, to publicly humiliate them like this, it's unprecedented. Your father won't be pleased, and the Queen Consort will be furious when she finds out." William looked up at his secretary with steely eyes. "Let them be furious. I've spent years watching this family be torn apart by people who put their own interests above the institution. I've watched scandals erupt, watched trust be broken, watched the monarchy's reputation suffer. I'm done being diplomatic about it. I'm done pretending everything is fine when it's not." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the palace grounds. "Do you know what those documents reveal, James? Do you know what Tom and Laura have been doing for the past 6 months?" James remained silent, knowing the question was rhetorical. "They've been meeting with journalists," William continued, his voice rising with barely controlled anger, "feeding them stories about the royal family, private information, family discussions, details about disagreements and tensions, all anonymous, of course. All carefully designed to make certain members of the family look bad, while making others look sympathetic." He turned back to face. "James, they've been the source behind it. At least a dozen damaging stories in the press. Stories about tensions between myself and my father. Stories about Catherine supposedly being unwelcoming to Camilla. Stories painting Harry as the victim and me as the villain in our relationship breakdown. All of it coming from them. From people who have been welcomed into this family, who have been treated with respect and courtesy." James absorbed this information with growing understanding. "How did you discover this?" "Our intelligence people finally traced the leaks," William said. "It took months of investigation, but they managed to identify the pattern. Every story came shortly after Tom or Laura had been present at family gatherings or palace events. The details in the articles matched conversations they would have overheard or been part of, and then we got lucky. One of the journalists they were working with got sloppy, sent an email that our security team intercepted. It confirmed everything." "Have you confronted them directly?" James asked. "Not yet," William replied. "But this morning's message is the opening move. They need to know that we know. They need to understand that they're being watched, that their actions have been discovered, and they need to face consequences." Back at the ceremony room, Tom and Laura were trying to maintain their composure as the event began. Admiral Hammond welcomed everyone, spoke about the importance of honoring those who had served, and introduced the veterans who would be receiving commendations. But the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew something was wrong, even if they didn't know exactly what. Tom's phone buzzed with another message from his mother. "I've spoken to Charles. He says he knows nothing about any change in protocol. He's trying to reach William now. Stay calm and get through the ceremony. We'll sort this out afterward." Staying calm was becoming increasingly difficult. As the ceremony progressed, Tom noticed that palace staff who would normally be attentive and helpful were keeping their distance. When he tried to speak with one of the aides about arranging transportation back to the gates after the event, the young woman could barely make eye contact and mumbled something about checking with her supervisor. Laura leaned close to her brother. "We're being treated like pariahs. This isn't just about the guards. The entire palace staff has been told to keep away from us." "I know," Tom replied quietly. "The question is why? What do they think we've done?" The ceremony concluded after 45 minutes. The veterans received their commendations, photos were taken, and refreshments were served. Tom and Laura tried to participate gracefully, speaking with some of the honored guests and their families. But they could feel the weight of judgment hanging over them. As they prepared to leave, Admiral Hammond approached them again. This time, his expression was more sympathetic than uncomfortable. Mr. Parker Bowles, Mrs. Lopes, I want you to know that whatever is happening here today has nothing to do with the military's respect for your family. The men and women of the armed services appreciate the Queen Consort's support and dedication. Thank you, Admiral, Laura said. Though I suspect the guards who refused to salute us earlier today might disagree with that sentiment. The guards follow orders, Hammond said carefully. And today they were given very specific orders regarding protocol. That's all I can say. As Tom and Laura walked back through the palace corridors toward the exit, the same silent treatment awaited them. Guards stood at attention, but not one salute was offered. Palace staff moved aside to let them pass, but said nothing beyond the bare minimum of courtesy. It was like walking through a building full of ghosts who could see them but refused to acknowledge their existence. When they finally reached their cars outside the palace gates, Laura was visibly shaking with anger and humiliation. That was the most degrading experience of my life, she said. We were treated like criminals, like we had committed some terrible crime and been found guilty without even being told what we're accused of. Tom was equally furious, but trying to think strategically. This is William. It has to be. Father would never authorize something like this. He's too concerned about family harmony. And Mother obviously had no idea this was coming. William is sending us a message. What kind of message? Laura demanded. That we're not welcome. That we're not part of the real royal family. That we're outsiders who are being tolerated at best. I've spent years trying to maintain a respectful relationship with that family, trying to support Mother, trying to stay out of palace politics, and this is how they treat us? His phone rang. It was his mother calling. He answered immediately. Mother. Camilla's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. Tom, I've just heard what happened. I'm so sorry. This is outrageous. I'm on my way back to London now. Charles is demanding an explanation from William. This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable. Do you know why this happened? Tom asked. Do you have any idea what we're being accused of? No, Camilla said, though there was a slight hesitation in her voice that Tom caught. I have no idea what's gotten into William. But we're going to get to the bottom of this. I promise you. After the call ended, Tom sat in his car for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. His mind was racing through recent events, trying to identify anything that might have triggered such an extreme response from William. Had he said something offensive at a family gathering? Had Laura done something to upset Catherine? Nothing came to mind that would justify this level of public humiliation. What Tom didn't know was that at that very moment, Prince William was sitting down with his father, King Charles, in the king's private study. The meeting was tense from the start. Charles had been pulled out of an important diplomatic engagement when he learned what had happened at the palace, and he was not pleased. Would you care to explain what happened this morning? Charles asked, his voice cold and formal. Why were my wife's children subjected to deliberate disrespect by palace guards acting on your orders? William met his father's gaze steadily. Because they've been betraying this family for months, and it's time they faced consequences for their actions. Charles stood up from his chair, his face reddening. Betraying. What are you talking about? William opened a folder on the desk and slid several documents across to his father. These are summaries of leaked stories that have appeared in various newspapers over the past 6 months. Stories about family tensions, private disagreements, personal details that only someone with inside access could know. Charles picked up the papers, scanning them quickly. His expression grew more troubled with each page. I'm aware of these stories. They've been damaging, certainly. But what does this have to do with Tom and Laura? They're the source, William said flatly. Our security team traced the leaks back to them. They've been meeting with journalists, trading information for favorable coverage of Camilla, making her look like the peacemaker, the reasonable one, while painting others in the family as difficult or hostile. Charles sank back into his chair, the papers still in his hands. You have proof of this? We have circumstantial evidence that's extremely compelling. And we have one intercepted communication that confirms they were in contact with at least one journalist who ran several of these stories. William pulled out another document. This is an email exchange between Tom Parker Bowles and Jeremy Matthews, the royal correspondent for The Guardian. Tom was providing background on family dynamics, supposedly on deep background, not for attribution. Charles read the email, his face growing pale. The exchange was damning. Tom was clearly feeding information to the journalist. Information that had subsequently appeared in articles that had caused significant problems for the family. "Does Camilla know about this?" Charles asked quietly. "I don't know," William admitted. "Either she's aware and has been covering for them, or they've been operating behind her back. Either way, it needed to stop. And they needed to understand that there are consequences for betraying family trust." Charles set the papers down on his desk, his hands trembling slightly. "So you decided to have them publicly humiliated? To have guards refuse to salute them in front of palace staff and ceremony guests? William, do you have any idea what kind of scandal this is going to create?" "I'm fully aware," William replied, "and I decided it was worth it. Father, we've been too soft for too long. We've allowed people to operate within our circle, to have access to private information. And then we act surprised when that information ends up in newspapers. We need to draw clear lines. We need to show that actions have consequences. By humiliating my wife's children." Charles's voice rose with anger. "By creating a public spectacle that will dominate headlines and raise questions about family unity? This was incredibly poor judgment, William." "Was it?" William challenged. "Or was it necessary? Father, they've been damaging this institution for months. They've been contributing to stories that undermine our credibility, that make us look dysfunctional and divided. How is that acceptable? How is tolerating that kind of betrayal good judgment?" Charles stood up again, walking to the window. He was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with conflicting emotions. On one level, he understood William's anger. If Tom and Laura had been leaking information, that was indeed a serious betrayal. But the way William had handled it, the public nature of the punishment, seemed excessive and dangerous. "What did you hope to accomplish with today's display?" Charles finally asked. "I wanted them to know that we know," William said. "I wanted them to understand that they're being watched, that they can't continue operating the way they have been. And I wanted to send a message to anyone else who might be thinking about betraying family confidences. There are consequences." "Well, you've certainly sent a message," Charles said bitterly. "You've sent a message to the entire world that there's a serious rift in this family. You've given the press exactly the kind of story they love, internal conflict and drama. And you've put me in an impossible position with my wife. Father, with all due respect, Camilla's children created this situation. I'm just responding to it." Charles turned back to face his son. "No, you're escalating it. You're taking a problem that could have been handled quietly, privately, and you're turning it into a public crisis. That's not leadership, William. That's revenge." The word stung, and William felt his anger rising again. "It's not revenge. It's accountability. Something this family has struggled with for generations." "Don't lecture me about accountability," Charles snapped. "I've spent my entire life dealing with the consequences of this family's mistakes and scandals. I know better than anyone how difficult it is to maintain dignity and respect while navigating impossible situations." They stood there, father and son, both angry, both convinced they were right. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken tensions and disagreements about how the monarchy should be run. Finally, Charles spoke again, his voice weary. "What happens now? You've made your dramatic gesture. Tom and Laura have been humiliated. The palace is buzzing with gossip. What's your next move?" "I'm going to confront them directly," William said. "I'm going to show them the evidence we have and demand that they stop their contact with journalists. If they agree and cooperate, then perhaps we can move forward. If they don't, then they'll have to face more serious consequences." "Such as?" Charles asked. "Such as being completely cut off from family events. No more invitations to ceremonies or celebrations. No more access to palace grounds. They'll be treated as outsiders because that's how they've been acting." Charles closed his eyes, a headache forming behind his temples. "And Camilla? How do you think your stepmother is going to react when you tell her that her children are being banished from the family?" "That's between you and her," William said. "But she needs to understand that protecting people who betray this family isn't acceptable. She has to choose what's more important, her loyalty to her children or her loyalty to the institution she married into. Charles stared at his son with a mixture of shock and disappointment. "You're asking me to force my wife to choose between her children and this family? William, that's cruel." "That's not how families work. It's how royal families work," William said firmly. "We don't have the luxury of putting personal feelings above institutional needs. You know that better than anyone. You've made sacrifices your entire life for this institution. Why should Camilla's children be exempt from the same standards?" Before Charles could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Camilla entered without waiting for permission, her face flushed with anger. She had driven back from Scotland at dangerous speeds, ignoring all advice to slow down. Desperate to reach the palace and confront whoever was responsible for what had happened to her children, she demanded, looking between her husband and stepson. "Charles, I just spoke to Tom and Laura. They were mortified. Humiliated in front of military officers and veterans. Guards refused to salute them. Staff treated them like criminals." "Who authorized this?" William stood up. "I did." Camilla turned her full fury on him. "You? On what authority?" "You're not king yet, William. You don't get to decide how members of this family are treated. I have the authority as heir to the throne, and as someone who actually cares about protecting this institution." William shot back. "Your children have been leaking information to the press. They've been betraying family confidences for months, possibly longer. Today was a message that such behavior won't be tolerated." Camilla's face went pale. "That's absurd. Tom and Laura would never do such a thing. They've always been respectful of royal privacy. You're making wild accusations without evidence?" William picked up the folder and handed it to her. "Here's your evidence. Read it. See for yourself what your children have been doing behind your back." Camilla snatched the folder and began reading. Charles watched her face carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. At first, she seemed dismissive, scanning the pages quickly as if looking for obvious flaws in the argument. But as she read deeper, as she saw the email exchange between Tom and the journalist, her expression began to change. "This can't be real," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Tom wouldn't do this." "The email is real," William said. "We verified it through multiple sources. Your son has been feeding information to journalists, and the pattern of leaks suggests your daughter has been doing the same thing." Camilla sank into a chair, still holding the papers. She read through them again, more slowly this time. Charles could see the realization dawning on her face, the horrible understanding that what William was saying might actually be true. Why would they do this? She asked quietly, speaking more to herself than to anyone else in the room. What possible reason would they have? "To protect you," William said, his tone softening slightly. "Or at least, that's probably how they justified it to themselves. By leaking stories that made other family members look bad, they thought they were helping your position, making you look like the reasonable one. The peacemaker." Camilla looked up at him, tears forming in her eyes. "I never asked them to do that. I never wanted them involved in palace politics. But you benefited from it," William pointed out. "The stories that appeared made you look sympathetic while creating problems for others. Your popularity in certain press circles increased while relationships within the family became more strained." "I didn't know," Camilla insisted. "You have to believe me. I had no idea they were doing this." Charles moved to his wife's side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I believe you," he said gently. "But William's right that this is a serious problem. If Tom and Laura have been the source of these leaks, it's a betrayal of trust that can't be ignored." Camilla wiped her eyes, her momentary vulnerability replaced by defensive anger. "So, your solution was to humiliate them publicly? To have them treated like criminals? There are other ways to handle family disagreements, William. Private conversations, direct confrontations. You didn't have to shame them in front of the entire palace staff." "I did what I thought was necessary," William said, refusing to back down. "A private conversation would have been denied, explained away, minimized. This way, they know we're serious. They know there are real consequences for their actions." "Consequences?" Camilla stood up, her voice rising. "You want to talk about consequences? Let me tell you what the consequences of today will be. The press is going to explode with speculation. Theories about why guards didn't salute my children will spread like wildfire. This family's dirty laundry will be aired publicly. Relationships that were already strained will break completely. That's what you've accomplished with your dramatic gesture. Perhaps William acknowledged, but at least everyone will know where the lines are now. At least people will understand that betraying this family's trust comes with a price. Camilla shook her head in disgust. You sound just like your grandmother sometimes. Cold, calculating, putting institution above humanity. Is that really the kind of king you want to be? The comparison to Queen Elizabeth clearly struck a nerve. William's jaw tightened. My grandmother understood that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the good of the monarchy. She made plenty of them, even when they hurt personally. And look at the cost of some of those decisions, Camilla fired back. Look at the damage that was done to family relationships, the pain that was caused. Your Uncle Andrew? Your Uncle Harry? The constant scandals and rifts. Is that really the legacy you want to continue? Charles stepped between them, literally putting himself in the middle of the escalating argument. That's enough. Both of you. Fighting like this accomplishes nothing. He looked at Camilla. Your children need to be confronted about what they've done. Whether William's method was right or wrong, the underlying issue still needs to be addressed. Camilla nodded reluctantly. I'll speak to them. Today. But I'm telling you right now, if you expect me to cut them off or choose between them and this family, that's not going to happen. They're my children. I love them unconditionally, just as you love William and Harry unconditionally, Charles. Nobody's asking you to stop loving them, William said. But they can't continue having access to private family information if they're going to leak it to the press. That's just common sense. Fine, Camilla said sharply. Then perhaps we should all be more careful about what information is shared and with whom. Maybe the problem isn't just my children. Maybe the problem is that this family has become so dysfunctional that everyone is looking for allies and ways to protect themselves. She grabbed her phone and walked toward the door. I'm going to speak with Tom and Laura now. We're going to have a very difficult conversation. But let me be clear about something, William. If you ever humiliate my children like that again, you and I are going to have serious problems. I don't care if you're the future king. Some things are more important than protocol. She left the room, slamming the door behind her. Charles and William stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. That went well, Charles said sarcastically. She needed to hear it, William replied. She needed to understand the seriousness of the situation. What she understood is that you're willing to publicly shame her children to make a point, Charles said. William, I support holding people accountable for their actions, but I'm worried about your methods. You're becoming increasingly rigid, increasingly willing to burn bridges to enforce your vision of how things should be. William turned away, looking at the family portraits on the wall. Pictures of ancestors, kings and queens, who had faced their own challenges and controversies. Father, I'm trying to save this institution. Can't you see that? Every leak, every scandal, every breach of trust chips away at the monarchy's foundation. If we don't protect what we have, if we don't enforce standards and boundaries, we'll lose everything. I understand that fear, Charles said softly. I've felt it myself many times. But leadership isn't just about enforcing rules and punishing transgressions. It's also about building relationships, finding common ground, creating an environment where people want to support the institution because they believe in it, not because they're afraid of consequences. It's idealistic, William said. And idealism doesn't work when you're dealing with people who are actively trying to undermine you. Maybe, Charles conceded. Or maybe you're seeing enemies where there are just people making mistakes, people acting out of fear or insecurity rather than malice. Across London, Camilla arrived at Tom's house in Kensington. Both Tom and Laura were waiting for her, having driven there together after the ceremony. When Camilla walked in, they could see she had been crying, but her expression was hard to read. Mother, what's happening? Laura asked immediately. Why were we treated that way today? Camilla set her handbag down and looked at her children with an expression they had never seen before. Disappointment mixed with anger. Sadness mixed with determination. Tell me about your relationship with Jeremy Matthews, she said quietly. Tom's face went pale. What? Jeremy Matthews, the royal correspondent for The Guardian. Tell me about your conversations with him. Tell me about the information you've been providing him. Laura looked confused. Mother, what are you talking about? But Tom's reaction had already given him away. He couldn't meet his mother's eyes. His hands were shaking slightly. How did they find out? He asked quietly. Camilla felt her heart sink. Part of her had been hoping that William was wrong, that this was all a misunderstanding. But Tom's reaction confirmed the worst. So it's true. You've been leaking information to the press? It wasn't like that, Tom said quickly. I wasn't trying to damage anyone. I was trying to help you. Every story, every piece of information I shared, it was designed to make you look good, to counter the negative narratives that were being spread about you, by making other family members look bad, Camilla asked. By sharing private conversations and personal details that weren't yours to share? Laura was staring at her brother in shock. Tom, what have you done? I did what I thought was necessary, Tom said defensively. Mother, you don't know what it's been like? Watching the press tear you apart for years? Watching certain family members do nothing to defend you? Sometimes even contributing to the negative stories? I wanted to fight back. I wanted to show that you're a good person, that you deserve respect. So you betrayed the family's trust, Camilla said, her voice breaking. You took private information and fed it to journalists. Tom, do you have any idea what you've done? Not just to me, but to yourself, to your sister, to everyone. Laura didn't have anything to do with this, Tom said quickly. This was all me. She's innocent. But Camilla was looking at Laura now, seeing something in her daughter's expression. Laura, is that true? Were you not involved? Laura hesitated, then shook her head slowly. I knew about it. Tom told me what he was doing about 2 months ago. I didn't participate directly, but I didn't stop him either. I thought he was trying to help. Camilla felt like the ground was falling away beneath her. Both of her children had been involved in this betrayal. Both of them had known what was happening and had chosen to continue. She sat down heavily on Tom's sofa, suddenly feeling very old and very tired. Do you understand what you've cost me? She asked quietly. What you've cost this family. The trust that I've spent years building with Charles, with William, with the entire institution. It's been damaged, possibly beyond repair. And all because you thought you were helping me. You were helping you, Tom insisted. The stories we influenced, they improved your public image. Your approval ratings went up. People started seeing you as a voice of reason within the family. At what cost? Camilla demanded, her voice rising. At the cost of turning family members against each other? At the cost of deepening divisions that were already there? At the cost of making William so angry that he publicly humiliated you both today? William overreacted, Laura said. Having guards refuse to salute us was cruel and unnecessary. That was about his ego, not about justice. William was protecting the institution he will one day lead, Camilla said. And he was sending a message that betrayal won't be tolerated. A message that, frankly, needed to be sent. Tom looked at his mother in disbelief. You're taking his side? After what he did to us today? I'm not taking sides, Camilla said wearily. I'm trying to understand how we got to this point and figure out how to move forward. But Tom, Laura, you have to understand something. What you did was wrong. No matter how good your intentions were, no matter how much you thought you were helping me, sharing private family information with journalists is a betrayal of trust. It's exactly the kind of behavior that has damaged this family for generations. She pulled out her phone and showed them the evidence that William had presented. The email exchanges, the pattern of leaks. This is what they have. This is what convinced William that you were the source. Can you honestly tell me this is wrong? Can you deny that this is you? Tom looked at the screen, his face crumbling. I can't deny it. But Mother, I was only trying to protect you. You don't know what it's like being on the outside of that family, watching them treat you like you don't belong, like you're still the other woman, even after all these years. That's your perception, Camilla said gently, and maybe there's some truth to it. But Tom, working behind the scenes to manipulate press coverage isn't the solution. It only makes things worse. It confirms every suspicion people have about us, about our motives, about our loyalty. Laura was crying now. What's going to happen to us? Are we being banished from the family? That depends on you, Camilla said. William wants you to stop all contact with journalists. No more leaking information, no more background briefings, no more trying to shape coverage. If you agree to that, if you can be trusted to respect family privacy going forward, then perhaps we can rebuild some of what's been lost. And if we don't agree? Tom asked. Then you'll be cut off completely, Camilla said bluntly. No more invitations to family events? No more access to palace grounds. You'll be treated as outsiders because that's how you've been acting. Tom stood up, pacing across the room. This is ridiculous. We're family. You can't just cut us off because we tried to help you. Watch me, Camilla said, her voice hard. Tom, I love you. I love both of you more than anything in this world. But I also made a commitment when I married Charles. A commitment to this institution, to this family, to something bigger than just my personal feelings. If I have to choose between protecting you from the consequences of your own actions and protecting the integrity of the monarchy, I will choose the monarchy. The room fell silent. Tom and Laura stared at their mother in shock. They had never heard her speak this way before, had never seen her prioritize her royal duties over her children. You've changed, Laura said quietly. The woman who raised us would never have said that. The woman who raised you wasn't queen consort, Camilla replied. She wasn't married to the king. She didn't have responsibilities that extended to an entire nation. I have changed, Laura. I've had to change. And maybe it's time you both change too. She stood up, gathering her things. I need an answer from both of you. Are you willing to stop all contact with journalists? Are you willing to respect family privacy going forward? Yes or no? Tom and Laura looked at each other, having a silent conversation with their eyes. Finally, Tom spoke. Yes, we'll stop. We'll respect family privacy. We made a mistake, and we're sorry. I need more than words, Camilla said. I need you to understand why this was wrong, not just because you got caught, but because it violated the trust of people who welcomed you into their lives. I need you to genuinely commit to doing better. We do understand, Laura said, and we do commit. Mother, we never wanted to cause you this kind of pain. We thought we were helping, but we see now that we were only making things worse. Camilla studied her children's faces, trying to determine if they truly understood or if they were just telling her what she wanted to hear. Finally, she nodded. All right. I'll convey your commitment to Charles and William. But understand this, you're on probation now. One more incident, one more leak, one more breach of trust, and it's over. You'll be completely cut off, and I won't be able to protect you. She left Tom's house and drove back to the palace, emotionally exhausted. The conversation with her children had been one of the hardest things she had ever done, but she knew it was necessary. The monarchy couldn't survive if people felt free to leak private information whenever it suited them. When she arrived back at the palace, she went straight to Charles's study. He was sitting at his desk, reading through papers, but looked up immediately when she entered. How did it go? He asked. They admitted to everything, Camilla said, sitting down across from him. Tom was the primary source, but Laura knew about it and didn't stop him. They claimed they were trying to help me, trying to improve my public image by making others look bad. Charles sighed deeply. What did you tell them? I told them it was unacceptable. I told them they were betraying family trust. And I told them that if it happens again, they'll be cut off completely. She looked at her husband with tired eyes. I chose you, Charles. I chose this family, this institution. I hope that means something. Charles stood up and walked around the desk, pulling his wife into an embrace. It means everything, he said softly. I know how difficult that conversation must have been. I know how much you love your children. I do love them, Camilla said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. But I love you too. And I made a commitment to this role, to these responsibilities. I can't put my personal feelings above the institution's needs. They held each other for a long moment, finding comfort in the embrace. Finally, Charles pulled back. What happens now? How do we move forward from this? I think we need a family meeting, Camilla said. All of us together, Charles, William, Catherine, Tom, Laura, and me. We need to clear the air, establish boundaries, and figure out how to rebuild trust. Today's events were traumatic for everyone, but maybe they can be a turning point. Charles nodded slowly. William won't like it. He'll think we're being too soft. William doesn't have to like it, Camilla said firmly. He made his point today. He sent his message. Now we need to focus on healing and moving forward, not on punishment and revenge. That evening, the family meeting was arranged in one of the palace's private dining rooms. The atmosphere was tense when everyone gathered. William arrived with Catherine, his expression guarded. Tom and Laura looked uncomfortable and defensive. Charles and Camilla tried to project calm authority. William spoke first, his tone formal. Tom, Laura, I want to be clear about something. What happened today wasn't personal. It was a necessary response to a serious breach of trust. You were leaking information to the press, information that damaged this family and this institution. That couldn't be ignored or handled quietly. We understand that now, Tom said quietly. And we're sorry. We made a terrible mistake, and we're committed to doing better. Actions speak louder than words, William replied. You'll need to prove that commitment over time. But I'm willing to give you that opportunity. For my father's sake and for Camilla's sake, I'm willing to move forward if you're genuinely committed to change. Catherine spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. I think we all need to acknowledge that this family has communication problems. People feel they need to protect themselves or their loved ones by operating behind the scenes, by manipulating press coverage, by forming alliances. That's not healthy. That's not sustainable. You're right, Camilla agreed. And maybe this crisis is an opportunity to do things differently, to be more open with each other, to address problems directly instead of through intermediaries or press leaks. Laura looked at William. Can I ask you something? When you ordered the guards not to salute us, did you consider how humiliating that would be? Did you think about how it would feel to walk through those corridors, knowing everyone was watching our disgrace? William met her gaze steadily. I did consider it, and I decided it was necessary. You needed to understand that there are consequences for betraying this family's trust. Sometimes those consequences are public and uncomfortable. That's the reality of royal life. But it was cruel, Laura said, tears forming in her eyes. Whatever we did wrong, we didn't deserve to be humiliated like that, perhaps William acknowledged. But perhaps it was the wake-up call you needed. Sometimes kindness and understanding aren't enough. Sometimes people need to face real consequences before they change their behavior. Charles intervened before the conversation could escalate into another argument. What's done is done. The question now is how we move forward. Can we all agree to be more honest with each other? To address problems directly instead of through leaks and manipulation. Everyone around the table nodded, some more readily than others. The agreement felt fragile, provisional, but it was a start. Over the following weeks, the media speculation about what had happened at the palace that day was intense. Various theories circulated, some closer to the truth than others. The palace refused to comment beyond stating that there had been protocol adjustments that day and that all family relationships remained strong. Tom and Laura kept their heads down, avoiding any contact with journalists and focusing on their private lives. The lack of leaks from palace sources became noticeable to reporters who had grown accustomed to a steady stream of inside information. Without Tom's guidance, many stories that would have been slanted in Camilla's favor simply didn't appear. Interestingly, this actually improved family dynamics. Without competing narratives being pushed in the press, without constant speculation about who was feuding with whom, the family found it easier to interact naturally. Tensions that had been amplified by media coverage began to ease. William and Tom had an awkward but productive private conversation about 6 weeks after the incident. Tom apologized directly for his actions, and William acknowledged that his response had been harsh. They didn't become close friends, but they reached an understanding. Tom would respect family privacy, and William would treat him with the courtesy due to the Queen Consort's son. The relationship between Camilla and William remained complicated. There was still tension, still disagreement about how things should be handled. But there was also a newfound respect. Camilla appreciated that William had principles he was willing to fight for, even when it meant confronting family members. William appreciated that when forced to choose, Camilla had put institutional needs above personal preferences. 6 months after the silent farewell that had shocked everyone, there was another ceremony at the palace. This time, when Tom and Laura arrived, the guards saluted them properly. Palace staff treated them with normal courtesy. It was as if the earlier incident had never happened, though everyone knew it had left permanent marks on family relationships. As Tom walked through those same corridors where he had been ignored months earlier, he felt the weight of what had happened. The salute he received now meant more than it would have before because he understood what it meant to lose it. He had learned a hard lesson about trust, about boundaries, about the price of loyalty. Whether those lessons would stick remained to be seen. But for now, at least, there was peace.